Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I am so nervous to film this video today, but excited at the same time. So we're gonna talk about natural family planning. NFP, if you follow me on Instagram, you've heard me talk about NFP, and a lot of people surprisingly have been like, what the heck is NFP? What are you even talking about? So I'm gonna use today's video to kind of share a little bit about NFP, to share about my experience, my journey doing NFP. So I hope to at least, I don't know, just even start the conversation about natural family planning. That way, if you're thinking that it might be for you or something you maybe want to look into or entertain at all, then maybe you can like take this video as like the little seed and go off and water it and do your own research and all of that. There is so much that goes into NFP, and I am not an expert by any means. I would say that I've probably been doing this for about 6 months, so I don't want you guys to think that I'm an expert. I can share my experience, I can share what it's been like in the 6 months that I have done it and share my struggles and all of that, but I am not an expert, so I'm gonna put that disclaimer out there. So if you happen to be new here, I do wanna welcome you and say hi. I'm Kayla, I am 32 years old. I am a mom of 2. So I have an almost 5-year-old and almost 3-year-old. I'm also Catholic, which is part of the discussion for today, but also not entirely the conversation. I want to tackle NFP in terms of 2 things. So I'll get into some of the reasoning why we decided to move forward with NFP in terms of like a religion, faith-based like reason behind it. But I do want to get across first and foremost the point that you don't have to be religious at all to practice NFP. There are plenty of good reasons to want to tackle like your fertility in a natural way, having nothing to do with religion or faith at all. I was on birth control, hormonal birth control for a very long time. And one of the reasons why I moved forward with NFP was just because I was tired of putting in like these artificial things in my body. Like I just wanted a more natural, way of handling my fertility, like I said. So I don't want you to think that this is just something that only crazy Catholics do. I'll get into, again, some of the more moral reasons for deciding to do what we've now been doing, but it's not just for that. So I hope that you can go into this conversation with just like an open mind and not just shut it down because you instantly are like, oh, well, I'm not Catholic or I'm not religious at all. Like, you are still welcome to listen to this video, and I hope you get something from it. Okay, sorry, I had to go to my bedside table because there's a couple things that I'm going to show you guys. But I guess before I keep going, I do want to just mention this is an adult conversation. This is an adult video. I know a lot of times you guys will listen to my videos or watch them with your kids around. We are going to talk about more adult concepts, intimacy. I'll probably say sexy time, things like that. I mean, we're not gonna get like super graphic here, but it's like an adult topic. So definitely either listen with your little headphones in or just wait till the kids aren't around. I don't want, for then this to be on and then I say something and you're like, well, great, you scarred my children for life. So I have no notes. I'm literally spitballing like I always do, but I have a couple concepts that I wanna talk about. So what is NFP? Like how or why we decided to go this route, and then like the practical, like how we practice this. So in terms of a little bit of my journey, I was on birth control probably since I was like 18 years old. I can't tell you exactly when, but I would take the pill. I think I started taking the pill, and then at one point I did the NuvaRing. I don't know if anybody's heard of it, but it was like another thing that you would put in your body, and essentially the reason for taking it is so that you wouldn't have to worry about getting pregnant, right? Like that's how it's sold to you. But point is, I think we can all agree, you take birth control to control the births, right? To prevent yourself from getting pregnant or to really decrease the chances of getting pregnant. Like nothing is 100% except for abstinence. So even in my marriage, even since Joe and I have been together, I've been on some kind of birth control. And so now, since doing natural family planning, I got off of birth control. So there is no birth control for me right now. There is also no condoms. There is no barrier to the potential for maybe having children. And I know that that's like a super scary conversation and concept and all of that. And yes, I'm not gonna disagree with you. But one of the things that has been really great about NFP is learning about my cycle, learning about the female fertility cycle. knowing that there are certain times of the month where you're actually fertile, where you actually have a chance of getting pregnant. You can't actually get pregnant every single day of the month. And I feel like that's one of the things that I wish we knew a little bit more about. Like, again, I'm 32 years old and there's so much of this that I learned about that I was like, why didn't I learn about it? Or why was it not emphasized? And absolutely, is it much easier just to pop a pill and to say, okay, look, now I can have sex and I'm not gonna get pregnant? It's definitely less work involved, but taking an NFP approach, you start learning about your body and your cycle. We'll talk about like how exactly I track things, but essentially in a nutshell, what you're doing is you're taking a more natural approach to your cycle and to your fertility and learning about your body, identifying which days you are most fertile, so that then based off of that information, like if I know that okay, most periods, we'll talk about that there are exceptions. Most of our cycles in a woman, let's say a typical cycle is 28 days. So you start identifying within those 28 days, which days are my fertile days. So in between those 28 days, there is a window where your chances for getting pregnant are much higher. I mean, a lot of us women learn about that when we're trying to get pregnant, when you're trying to conceive. I remember when I was trying to conceive with Riley, like I had a little period tracker app and I would look at it and put in the day of my last period. And then it would tell me, oh, these are the days where you're most fertile. And then that's when you would try to have sex so that you could conceive a child. So I think some of us are familiar with that if you've actively tried to conceive. So you're kind of taking that information in a way, and some people choose to use that information to then abstain from sex during that time, if you're using this more as like a birth control method. Other people use that information and say, okay, well, you know, that's when I'm most fertile. If we are intimate on that day, then I have more of an increased chance in getting pregnant. But point is, you're using that information and learning about your body and learning to track different things in your body, as opposed to just popping a pill, as opposed to just putting, you know, a shot or whatever, all the different forms of birth control that exist there, you know, now. You're doing it in just a more natural way. So I hope that makes sense. I'm trying, again, it's a lot of information. And like I said, I know that I'm not an expert. I'm just sharing with you guys what I know. Most people, when they start NFP, they are usually referred to some kind of a coach or somebody that can help guide them. So I'm always going to refer you to my NFP coach. Her name is Ellen. I am in no way associated with her. I don't make money from referring you to her. I don't get any kind of kickback or anything, but I think that she's a great source for all things NFP. She's a coach. She teaches about this, but she also has a podcast. So I'm going to leave all of her information in the description box. I feel like it's a good place to start if you're starting just to think about NFP. If you're starting to flirt with the idea, maybe it would be worth just following her on Instagram. She has an Instagram account, and then she's always like sharing info there. But then she also has a podcast, which is great because it talks about a lot of the specifics about NFP and a lot of the emotional stuff that happens with the NFP. And some of that I can share with you guys. But, you know, if you're looking for an expert, like that's what she does. She is trained on a specific like method of NFP. I'm always going to send you there because I recognize that I am not an expert. So I hope to at least be able to just like send you in the right direction. So when I first started NFP, I actually worked with her and I signed up for like a one-on-one training with her. And I mean, if you guys are not new here, this is something that we had to do, Joe and I, when we were doing the convalidation process for being married through the Catholic Church. One of the requirements was that we took an NFP class. And so that's how I got in touch with Ellen, and that's how I started learning about NFP. So maybe at this point you understand like the concept, no birth control, you're doing it more natural, and you're like, okay, but then what the heck does that mean? How do you actually do it? So there's different methods, and I have not explored all the methods. I have explored the one method that Ellen has taught me, which is called the Symptothermal method. There are other methods that I will tell you that I have heard anecdotally and just from like quick research on the internet that are maybe a little bit, maybe easier in some ways. So I'm gonna just talk to you first about that one, and then I'll talk to you about one other method that might be an option for you. But the Symptothermal method, let me just say, initially, it was a lot. Initially, when I first started going to these like virtual classes with Ellen, I was like, what the heck? I have to track a lot of information. This is scary. You see the chart, like the little doctor chart where you're tracking your temperatures. And it was like, what am I getting myself into? I don't know if I can do this. So if throughout the process of NFP, you start freaking out and you're like, this is just too much, I understand. But I can tell you that 6 months into it, it's a lot more familiar and it's a lot less like, oh my God, what the heck is happening? And so I think a lot of it has to do with just the overall approach that Joe and I have chosen now to take in terms of NFP, which I hope to kind of cover a little later, but just hang in there, okay? That's all I'm trying to say. Don't completely write it off if it's something that you want to look into, if you want to learn about. If it's something where you find like you have a lot of questions, I feel like you just need to get yourself some kind of instructor or coach to help walk you through the process, help walk you through the guidelines so you can understand it better. But once you understand it, it's not as scary as it looks. So that's just been my experience. So with the symptothermal method, I track a couple things, and you're supposed to track a couple different things. So you're supposed to track your temperature. You're supposed to track your cervical mucus, which I know is a scary thing. And like, oh, gross. I'm looking at my underwear and looking at the mucus down there. Believe me, I was like, what? Like, this is gross. Like, it was initially like, why are you asking me to do this? But okay. But anyway, you track your cervical mucus, and then you also track your cervix. I don't know a lot about that because that's not something that I presently do. I have chosen not to go that route, which again, the biggest thing with the symptothermal method is that the more you track and the more accurate you are with your tracking, then the better chance this has of working. If you're not on top of it, if you're not tracking your temperature, if you're not tracking your cervical mucus, then obviously there's a lot more room for error, right? In interpreting when it is that you're most fertile. So I take my temperature every morning. That's part of my morning routine right now. I have an oral little thermometer, and then I put it right under my tongue. Guys, when I found out that you have to take your temperature with NFP, I literally knew nothing about this, right? So I literally thought that this was gonna have to go in my butt. And I was like, I literally told Joe, I was like, if I have to take my temperature in my butt every day, so are you. Like, that's gonna happen because it's not fair that only I have to do this. And he was like, well, that's not gonna happen. But point is, it's not in your butt, it's literally under your mouth. So I take my temperature every morning with this. There's also other fancier ways to take your temperature. Like this is called the temp drop, which is like a little thing that I put in my arm. I use them both right now just as like a cross check because God forbid like this gets lost or God forbid this doesn't work. I kind of like have like an extra thing to kind of cross-reference with. As we go having some of these conversations about NFP, we can kind of get more into like the specifics, but this is supposed to just kind of give you an idea, kind of like at a glance look at NFP and what it looks like for me right now. So I take my temperature. Then throughout the day when I'm using the bathroom, I'm also looking at my underwear and I'm looking at the mucus in my underwear. Like, yes, it sounds gross, but if it's something that you end up pursuing, you start learning about like just the different things that show up on your underwear throughout your cycle. And what's fascinating is that as you do this like month to month, you start noticing like, oh wow, like halfway through my cycle or like on day 14 of my cycle, I always like am super wet down there. And like there's a reason for that because it's not just random. It's not like, oh well, one day you're wet down there, one day you're not. Like it's a cycle and it's happening because specific things happen in your body at different times of the month, really to prepare you for releasing an egg and for the potential of it being fertilized. Like the way that God made your body is absolutely incredible. And it's something that's so cool just to learn, just like from a science perspective, just to learn how your body really works. I think that's very empowering. Like I think it's very empowering just to know how your body works and when certain things are happening and why certain things are happening. Because you know what, like God forbid, like if you were on the pill, if you were on birth control and for some reason, right, let's say supply chain shortages or some random, maybe not so random thing these days, like something happens and you can't get your birth control, or you know what, condom manufacturers are on freaking fire or something, and you don't have anything available to you, does that mean that like you're gonna stop having sex? Like I think it's very empowering to have a method where you're able to know what's happening to your body and to make decisions based on what's happening with your body, that you're not depending on your birth control, you're not depending on condoms. That to me is a lot more empowering than relying on some of these other sources, just from a personal, you know, feeling. All right, sorry, I have no clue where we were on or what I was talking about because the kids woke up from quiet time and I had to go get them settled with Joe downstairs. But regardless, I think it's a good time to point out the fact that when I first started with NFP, I had to take a course with my instructor, Ellen, and it was like for 2-hour blocks. I don't know if it was like for 4 weeks. Like it wasn't just a, hey, let's take a 1-hour course. Like it was a very involved kind of thing in terms of like when you're first learning about it. So in no means do I want you to think like, oh, you're gonna get all the information about NFP from watching this video. This is like a stepping stone. And from here, I hope that if it's something you want to continue to learn about or pursue, that you do that, and that you do know also that as my friend, like you can always ask me questions. You know, I'm here for you. I don't have all the answers, but maybe I can kind of, you know, help steer you in the right direction. But I think I was talking about tracking, right? So talking about how I take my temperature and then I track my cervical mucus. The other thing that you can track is your cervix, but like I said, I don't really know too much about that because I don't have that cross check. So automatically going into the symptothermal method, knowing that I only do the temperature and the cervical mucus, I do know that the efficacy of it is going to decrease the less that I track. However, that being said, there are studies out there that will prove that if you're actually tracking correctly, it is a very effective method. It's not like, oh, it only works like for 50% of the time. Like it's in the 90s. Like I don't have the exact percentage, but there have been studies that say that this is like a realistic method that you can use if you're trying to prevent pregnancy. So just don't think that it's, again, like, well, there's a 50-50 chance you're gonna get pregnant. But in order to have like the odds in your favor there, like you have to do it correctly and you have to stay on top of it. So yeah, that was a little bit of an adjustment at first, like learning that now in the morning I have to take my temperature. Now it's super easy. And then throughout the day, like everybody's going to the bathroom, everybody's peeing throughout the day. So you just look at your underwear. And then I have an app that I use to track all of these observations, and it's called Read Your Body. So Temp Drop is this. That's another little app that I use because it's how it reads the temperature for this. And then I input everything into Read My Body, but it's got like a place where I put my temperature. I can record sensation. I think that's another thing that I record using Symptothermal. And then the cervical mucus. So it's very easy, the app, to like input everything, but it still is up to you and your instructor to like read the information. My little chart here is gonna have like a whole bunch of little dots, and I'm not like trying to show you because I put like hearts of like how often Joe and I are having sexy time. But you see my chart will look something like this throughout the month. And that's just like all the data that I put in. So with the symptothermal method, I've got all this data, right, that I'm tracking. What you're doing essentially, like I said before, you're identifying like starting on day 7, my chances of getting pregnant go up. So my fertile time is from day 7 to day 19. Let's say, I don't have that off the top of my head, but that is the window that if I want to abstain, you know, from having sex because I'm most fertile, then that's what you should do. Or again, just knowing that, hey, heads up, you can get pregnant if you have sex during this time. And then, so yes, there's couples that will sometimes choose to avoid during that time, or there's couples that are like, well, we'll continue as normal, and if it happens, it happens. Now, there are other methods, like I said, so this isn't the only one. I think I've heard of one called the Marquette method, which basically it's like a little, you buy a little device, and then similar to like pregnancy tests, like throughout the month on certain times, like you pee on a stick, put the little test in the device, and it'll tell you like fertile or not fertile, or I don't know if it says like ovulating, kind of like how some people take ovulation tests to check when they're ovulating. So if they're trying to conceive, they have sex on that day, on the day that they're ovulating, on the day that they're most fertile. So that method, like if you don't want to necessarily track your cervical mucus, or you don't want to track, I don't know if you're still required to take your temperature with that method. Again, I do not know. I am not an expert on literally any of these methods, okay? I've only been doing it for 6 months. But I just say that to show you that the symptothermal method isn't the only one. And so I think actually Ellen, every once in a while, I know she did it a while ago, she offered like an overview of like different NFP methods so that you could kind of figure out which one you might want to pursue. So definitely reach out to her if you're interested in anything like that. But in the 6 months that I have been doing it, you guys, it's been the greatest blessing in our marriage, honestly. And this is kind of where I can go into a little bit of our journey and like just why we chose this route, or I don't even know, like there's just so much to cover, which by the way, you guys had asked me questions on Instagram about NFP. I have decided, like I read through them just to have like an idea of like what you guys wanted for me to kind of explain and cover in this video. So I'm hoping that I kind of have touched already on a little bit of that, but I will be doing, right after this video, I'm gonna film a Q&A specifically answering those questions and doing like a Q&A about NFP. So I already have questions that I'll answer, but if there's anything that you guys right now watching this video want to ask me, just leave it in the comments and I'll try to include some of those in the video too. But number one question from a lot of you guys was literally, I got so many messages that was like, TMI may be a little personal, but like, has it increased your sex drive, decreased your sex drive? Are you having the same amount of sex as you used to? And I'm gonna straight up tell you that our sex life has never been better. And it's such a crazy thing to talk about, to say, and I'm sorry if my mom watched that. She didn't need to know this information, but like, it has completely transformed our marriage. Our marriage in the last 6 months has grown and flourished in so many ways. And a lot of it just had to do with like just how we have both grown in our faith. Like, we've both been really working really hard and trusting God and just having faith be at the forefront of everything. And so that was a big reason why we decided to even explore NFP. So like I said in the beginning, I wanted to like explore NFP for 2 reasons. Number one, I was tired of the hormonal like birth control, like the pills and not knowing exactly what it's doing to my body. And like, I was kind of over that. So I wanted to get off of it for that reason. But also as a Catholic and as like now like taking my faith really seriously, I recently found out that the Catholic Church is against contraception. I didn't really know that, or maybe I learned it once upon a time ago, didn't think it was applicable, or I was like, well, I'll just say sorry, like, I'll just pretend that that's not like something that I have to follow. Like, it wasn't as important to me back then, clearly, because I've been on birth control like for a very long time, which again, this is not a judgmental video. This is not me telling you like, my goodness, you're a bad person, you can't be my friend because you're on birth control. Or even if after this video you decide, hey, I'm still gonna use a condom or I'm still gonna take birth control, I'm not here to judge you. I have literally been there. So it's just me sharing my experience and how it's transformed just so many things in my life. So yeah, I found out the Catholic Church is against contraception. A lot of people are gonna ask why. I am not a theologian, but I can try to link a couple of videos that I've watched recently that like kind of do like a deep dive on why. You know, I'll get a lot of people that have reached out to me every time that I share NFP and they're like, well, explain to me the Bible verse that it says you can't use contraception. So if you're interested, if you're one of those kinds of people that want to know why, which is a good, valid question, a good valid reason, again, you can check out some of those videos. But point is, I found that information out, and now this is something that I wanted to bring into my marriage, because to me, I felt like I wanted to be obedient to that. I wanted to really embrace the idea that sex and sexuality and intimacy is really for 2 functions. It's to bring a husband and a wife together, like to have it be a unitive, unifying experience. And then also to welcome the prospect of potentially like having a child be born out of that love. And so when I first presented this information to Joseph Buell, I remember we were here in my room and I was like, we have to have a conversation. Like, we have to, I need to talk to you, because I had already brought up the idea, like when Jackson turned 2, I immediately started having the conversation with Joe about like, well, what do you think about maybe starting to try for baby number 3? And he was like, oh, hell no. Like, absolutely not. He was so against it for so many reasons. I remember we had this conversation while we were out at a date night, and then I started crying. Like, it was not a fun time. So then shortly after that conversation is when I started really feeling called to NFP. And that's when I told him, like, listen, just, you know, I need to get off birth control. And he was like, oh, heck no, you're not getting off birth control. You're freaking crazy. Like, that's not happening. And it was one of those really hard conversations in our marriage, because I felt convicted. And I was like, it's not really about what you want. And it's not really about necessarily what I want. It's about what God wants. And I felt a really strong conviction. And like I said, being obedient to that. Because he straight up asked me, he's like, so I don't get a say in this? Like, I don't, like, you're not going to listen to what I want? And I'm like, it's not about what you want. Like God trumps you. Like he takes the trump card. Like it's not about what you want. And so you can have your feelings on that. That's fine. But that's how I felt in the moment. And so that kind of is one of the catalysts that started, you know, our process of going through convalidation and Joe diving into his faith. That just goes to show you, like, that's where we were like a good 6 months, a year ago. And so when we had that conversation, I didn't immediately get off of birth control. We just kind of started the process of reaching out to a priest, of praying. I was like, well, I'm just going to pray. I'm going to keep praying and praying and pray about it and offer it to God and like tell him like, look, I want to be obedient, but like my husband's not on board, like work in his heart, like all of the things. And it's been such a beautiful journey to watch like how God has worked in Joe's heart and in his life. And I'm going to get emotional because it is that emotional, and that's like a video for another day. But all of that to say, that was one of the reasons why we went and we started to pursue what we started to pursue. And our sex life has never been better. It is so beautiful to like know that the intimacy that we have is like open to life, essentially. So the question that I got asked was, well, are you guys trying to abstain in your fertile time? And there's been a lot of back and forth while we figure this out. Some of it is really hard. Like a lot of it, I mean, it is hard, period. It is hard. It is something new. And so in working with Ellen and working with our instructor, there's been a lot of conversations that we've had to work out a lot of the, like at first it was like, well, what, like I have to tell you then, like when I'm fertile, because I think when we first started, we were trying to avoid during my, you know, fertile time. So it was like, I felt like I had to tell him like, oh, by the way, I'm like a red dot right now, meaning like no go, like I'm fertile. So I had to tell him that, and like, you know, he was like coming on to me, and then I'd have to be like, well, no, I could be fertile right now. And then he'd be like, okay, well, then do I have to stop? Like there's a lot of communication, because I think the biggest thing is that both people have to be on the same page about it, because that's when it gets a little bit harder emotionally, which is a place that at the beginning of this journey, Joe and I were on, and I can probably share more about that like when I do my Q&A. But right now, Joe and I are kind of more at a place where we know when I'm most fertile. And have we been intimate during my fertile time? We have. So it's not like it's completely out of the question that maybe a child will be conceived. I'm not like looking at my app and saying, okay, I'm on my fertile day, it's day 14, I'm most fertile today, let's do it, like come on, you need to try to have a baby with me. Like that's kind of what we would do like when we were trying to conceive our children, like the other 2 kids we have. So right now we're at a place finally where I feel that we're more at peace with what could happen. So it's taken for us a bit to get here, and again, this is a journey. I'm not saying that we've reached this point and that won't change. Like I think the biggest thing for me right now is like, I'm 32 years old, and I am like, there are some days where I'm like, I would love another kid. And then there's other days like today, the kids are freaking driving me crazy. And I'm like, no, like I'm done. So I feel like the method that we're using right now, it takes so much of the pressure off of me and my decision and just completely gives it to God. And that's what I pray for every night. I give this to him 1,000%. And I'm like, listen, if you want us to have a kid, then let it happen. If you don't want us to have a kid, then I won't get pregnant, right? Like I give it to him, and there's so much pressure that is off either way. Like if we can't ever get pregnant again, then I don't feel like it was a decision necessarily that I made, or like that I'm gonna have regrets later on, like, man, I didn't try for the other one. Like I feel more at peace with it than I did when Joe first told me, you know, over a year ago, like, oh no, we're not having another kid. And then if we do, if God blesses us with a child, it's like, well, because we gave it to him and he decided that he wanted us to have one. And maybe that sounds bizarre. Maybe that doesn't make any sense to you. You know, you're totally entitled to that opinion. And I get that perhaps hearing some of this is like, okay, she's a freaking Looney Tune. Because I probably would have thought that, you know, a couple years ago if somebody had been saying this. But I'm a lot more at peace with the outcome either way. And on top of that, like I am enjoying just such a good partnership with my husband. And it really makes like, not that I'm trying to get like too graphic or in detail here about my sex life, but it really brings so much beauty to your intimate life together. Like, it's so much more like secure, and it's not rooted on like this idea that we're just here to like use each other or just to give each other pleasure. Like, I'm not saying that you can't have sex be a pleasurable thing. Like, God made sex for a reason, and he made it feel good because there's a reason for that. But it's not like this cheap thing, and it's not like I'm being used or he's being used, or like, you know, we just like, you know, want each other's bodies. Like, it feels really nice to like want each other, but also to know that like there's a potential for life there. There's a potential to work with God to create another life. Maybe that's not the best way to say it. Again, I'm just doing the best that I can here. But it, in my opinion, it changes things. And in my opinion, it changes things for the better. So I'm really enjoying this right now. I know myself, and I know that as I get older, it may become harder because like the idea is scary, right? Like, I have a fertile window, and you know, if we're having sexy time during my fertile window, then what does that mean? Like, I could be 39 years old and get pregnant, or I could be 40 years old and get pregnant because I'm not on birth control. We're not using a condom. We're not using pull-out method. Like, none of that. Like, do I want to be 40 years old and have a kid? Like, I know that there are women that do it and that happens, but the concept is scary. I thought I'd be done having my kids when I was 30, but that was like a long time ago. So as I get older, it would be scary. I could totally understand that it would be scary for someone that has like health issues. And that's why the Catholic Church, in their official teaching, I do believe that there are specific like caveats for like, there are specific good reasons for you to maybe abstain from sex during your fertile window. And so they lay that out there. There could be valid reasons why you would want to abstain from sex when you're most fertile. However, like for us, for Joe and I, after talking to our priest, who we love, he is the freaking best. He's the priest that married us. He straight up told us, like, you guys actually don't have like a real good reason to abstain during your fertile window. Like, you should really, truly, like, again, pray about it, but I think that you should be open to life at this point. So again, all we're trying to do is be obedient and, you know, do our thing. And if it happens, it happens. But it's still scary. Like, there are still, like, I think I got questions about, like, have you had a pregnancy scare yet? Like, yeah, like there have been times where, you know, after my fertile window is done, then there's like a waiting period to see if you're gonna get your period. And there have been times where I've been like, oh my goodness, like could I be pregnant? And then all the feelings and emotions that come with that. And then every time I've gotten my period, I am not pregnant at the moment, but then you're trying to evaluate, like, am I sad because I got my period? Am I happy because I got my period? And the emotions have kind of been all over the place. But I am at this point trusting that, you know, it's gonna work as it should. And I pray about it every single night. And I'm also just happy that Joe and I are in a really good place. And I feel confident that if there were to be a child conceived, again, we're not actively trying. We're not saying, hey, let's go for it. We want baby number 3 right this second. But if it does happen, I feel like we're at a much better place in our marriage than we were over a year ago. And we'd be able to, you know, make it work. I mean, there would be no other choice at that point. So yeah, that's kind of my way of introducing you to the practice of natural family planning. I hope that, I don't know, you got something from this, or heard a little bit about my journey, heard a little bit of my testimony to this process. I'll do a more chatty, like just answering your questions, girlfriend to girlfriend. If you guys want to know, again, specifics about certain things, or I get a lot of questions about like, well, you don't do this and you don't do this. Are you sure you can't do this? The church says you can't do this. Like, you can ask away and I'll try to answer as bluntly as I can. But this is such a great conversation to have. It's something that at this point in my life, I feel so happy to talk about. And it's just crazy because like I grew up, I remember being in like my, you know, late teens or early 20s or going to college, and like sex was one of those things that I always felt like I could talk about so easily. And you're kind of taught like, hey, you don't have to be ashamed to talk about sex. And like, you can literally I used to read the Cosmo magazines and all the things, like literally the front page of a Cosmo magazine these days is like freaking X-rated. But society like wants you to talk about all these things or to feel normal talking about these things. So from like a faith perspective, I would love to at least help to further the conversation and to talk about sex, but in a way that glorifies God, in a way that at least points you in the direction of, you know, yes, sex is good. Yes, God designed sex, but God designed sex for a reason, and in a way that when you do it the way that he designed it, it can be a really beautiful, good thing. And the problem is that unfortunately today, like, it has been so perverted. It has been so just twisted. And yes, this part of my video right now has everything to do with faith and morality, and you guys know for the most part where I stand. I've told you a million times, I'm a conservative Catholic woman. If you don't like that, this is not the channel for you. Everybody's welcome, but if this offends you in any way or makes you feel bad, then don't watch. So yeah, I wish that I had women maybe in the church just be more open and talk about NFP and talk about fertility and sexuality at a much younger age to me, like in an appropriate way, obviously, but like to let me know that this is an option is what I'm trying to say. Like, I feel like I got zero guidance from the church. Like, it was just, sex was just, you were literally just told you have to wait until you get married to have sex, and that's it. And then once you get married, then it's okay. And there's so much more that should probably be covered and talked about. And then like once you have sex, then like, again, there's just a lot. There's a lot to talk about. So I'm very passionate about it is what I'm trying to say. And I hope that I can use my platform or my Instagram or whatever to be part of the conversation and to, I don't know, just spread a little bit of awareness about it. And funny enough, you guys, when I first shared on Instagram that I started, you know, using NFP and all of that, I was surprised by how many people came into my DMs and were like, oh my goodness, I do NFP too. Like, that's so great. I've had like a good number of people talk about it. And the one thing that everybody says is like, I don't really know that many people that do it, or there's not enough people talking about it. And so I would hope to maybe change that narrative a little bit, even just from a woman's health, knowing your own body, knowing what's going on down there, like even from just that perspective alone, I think it's important. And I think it's worth at least having like a decision being made, not just like, oh, you're now gonna start having sex. Here you go, here's some condoms, here's the birth control. Like, of course that makes money. Like, of course, everybody wants to hand you a pill because it makes them money. Like, it doesn't cost a lot of money for you to be tracking your, you know, taking your temperature, looking at your underwear, doing your chart, and then recognizing the signs of when you're fertile versus when you're not fertile. That's not an industry. That's not something that's gonna make big pharma money. But yeah, it's been a very great experience, and that's all I'm gonna say for today's video. And I prayed before this video that God would at least like lead me in the right direction of sharing my message with you guys. So I hope somebody out there listened to what I had to say. Perhaps you think I'm stranger than you thought when you started this video, but that's okay. So I love your faces. Like I said, there will be a follow-up to this. If you want to share anything down below, any resources you have, any of that, please feel free to do so. But I have loved it. So I love your faces for being here. Thanks for being here. If you're new and you still are here, then subscribe, stick around. I just share my life with my kids, and we do homeschooling and like all the things. And I'd love to have you just be another one of my mom's friends over here. So I love you. Thanks for being here. Make sure to give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.